Welcome. This is our Cofounder Dynamics uh, twice monthly Zoom call, and the purpose of these calls is to just kind of support co-founders, business partners, entrepreneurs, and maintaining a learning and growth orientation in their partnerships. In It's because in our experience, partnerships are difficult and they bring up a lot of personal challenge. And the key in resilient partnerships is um, learning from the conflict, learning from the tension, having a reflective, humble, and open orientation to adapt and kind of roll with things. And where partnerships become brittle, fragile, and frayed is when that process stops. People come to conclusions about their partners. They come to uh, uh, they they um, they kind of just step off the learning curve and say, "This is not for me." Now, sometimes that's perfectly fine, but in a lot of cases, that decision is made because there's really no alternative. And uh, this co-founder program is really, hopefully, an antidote to that, and provides a resource and a community to support people in growing as leaders, entrepreneurs, and partners. So today's call is focused on performance expectations and really expectations in general. This is a big subject, and it's obviously one that comes up a lot in co-founder disputes, um, uh, and it's an area that I'm focusing on, and we're focusing on today because it's just rife with misunderstanding. And here's what I mean by that. I think it's generally seen as like a good thing to have high standards and hold people to high standards and so forth. That's kind of, you could say, out there in the world, it's sort of regarded perhaps as a like a positive thing, a good thing. And uh, what what that orientation really fails to take into account the ways where projecting expectations onto other people can really throw a wrench into relationships. And without a real understanding of what expectations are and what role they play, and what is an effective orientation towards expectations, what I've seen is that having expectations does more harm than good. Um, so let's take, like, taking a kind of a prototypical example of a situation where expectations might play a role. Okay, let's say you have two partners. One of them has a certain. Let's say one of them, has a set of personal boundaries around, like, spending time with their family. So they won't work on weekends, or they tend to be okay with taking time off and family vacations and so forth. The other partner, doesn't see things that way. They're very much like, nose to the grindstone, and places a lower priority on that other stuff. So that is a situation where you could replace kind of time off with any number of other things, where, whether it's sort of attention to detail, or levels of professionalism, or all kinds of things that we have as standards of conduct. But in this example, we're using, like, say, time off as a as a place where kind of standards and expectations can diverge. And that's a very typical one, and it's one where a lot of people would look at it and say, well, yeah, that's like, those are two incompatible partners, and it's going to be a problem. Well, it it might be a problem, but it also doesn't have to be a problem. That is, in a well functioning relationship, in a well functioning partnership, it's kind of par for the course that two people are going to have a different set of values, different set of priorities, a different kind of orientation and way that they approach work, and so forth. I mean, that's kind of, you could take that as a sort of given. And there's nothing inherently right or wrong about either partner's approach here. So there's nothing inherently right about nose to the grindstone, having work as the sole exclusive priority. There's nothing right or wrong about it. There's nothing right or wrong about needing, or prioritizing time with family, or getting some downtime, or whatever it is. There's value and rightness and validity in both orientations, right? So if you have a well-functioning partnership, the the partners will talk about why they do things the way that they do things. So say the partner that is spending time off may share why they do that, like why it's important to them, why, what is it about, um, what is it about the time off that is meaningful to them, and the other partner might hear something in that and respect it and appreciate it and understand it and make efforts to accommodate it. And likewise, the partners maybe, taking more time off might hear the concerns of the other, of his or her partner, and learn from that as well, and kind of see areas or opportunities to make up for the time off, or organize work differently, or and so forth. Like, in the course of a dialogue, an open dialogue with a lot of listening and a lot of goodwill and a lot of rapport, um, the partners will come to understand each other and each other's values and priorities more deeply, and make adjustments and adapt to address the other's legitimate concerns. And there will just be this learning process, an evolution of the partnership, that is driven by dialogue and rapport. Now, the problem that we see all the time in co-founder disputes is that process gets hijacked, right? I mean, it basically, instead of the dialogue that I just described, what you have are rigid positions driven largely by difficult emotions. So the difficult emotions, and 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 it's very tricky, right? Because the hardened positions and the emotions to the people that have them don't look that way, right? And so it looks, so they don't partners don't see that this is occurring. That is, the way that it looks is that their partner has clearly and obviously violated a fundamental value, and most likely it looks like their partner is doing it intentionally as well. So in a um, so to go back to that example of time off, um, in a partnership that is not, um, that doesn't have a high level of rapport and understanding, which is what we're trying to build through these programs. In a partnership that doesn't have a good level of rapport and goodwill and understanding, the partner that isn't taking the time off is likely to jump to conclusions about the other partner and their intentions, and their priorities and their values, and and just assume that that other partner, say, doesn't care about the business, or doesn't care as much as he does, or is inconsiderate of the work that that they're doing, right? And so they'll, um, they might keep all of that inside and not express it, in which case resentment piles up, and the kind of partnership drifts farther and farther apart, because they're living in two separate mental worlds, really. Or if they do bring it up, it will be from a position of extreme personal, um, from intense personal grievance. So they'll attack the other partner for not caring, and not having the right priorities and being inconsiderate. And the other partner naturally, will, when approached in that way, we all will, kind of tend to get defensive and defend ourselves, um, and fight back, because we're being attacked. We're not getting approached with to a bid to enter into dialogue and understanding. We're being attacked on a personal level, and so that conversation's not going to go particularly well, most likely. you know and and that unless there's a course correction, will has there's great risk there that things will spiral in a downward, counterproductive direction, and this initial misunderstanding will kind of metastasize and spiral, and will play itself out in other behavioral areas as well, because what there is a basic kind of misunderstanding at work. Okay. So what I want to do now is kind of shift into talking about what the misunderstanding is, and point in a kind of direction, a deeper direction, the so that these kind of expectations and standards that we have don't kind of get in the way as much, and um, yeah, they don't kind of get in the way and hijack and interfere with good partnership. So here's there's really, I think, is four, key misunderstandings that I want to address, and I'll try to get through them as quickly as I can. So the first one is that we tend to see our own expectations as kind of obvious, or obviously correct, and obviously the way that things should be done. And what we don't see is that expectations that we have about, whether it's towards ourselves or towards others, are just totally made up. They're completely subjective. They're just a set of ideas that we have developed based on our own life experience, our own learning, our childhoods, whatever it is. Like, every single moment up to our lives has led to this moment right now, where we have a certain idea about, like, how to be successful in life and at work, and that's fine. It's the way it is. It's kind of like how we're wired. We do our best. We come up with a set of, like, standards and life philosophies, and we live according to them. But it we need to understand that our standards are really basically just something that we made up. They're a product of our own thoughts. They're our own ideas. So it's completely kind of insane and illogical to expect somebody else to be living their life according to a set of standards that we made up. It's makes far more sense that people live according to their own standards and their own expectations. So that's kind of like misunderstanding number one, is just simply not seeing, not appreciating the subjectivity of standards. Like, it's not to say that our standards are totally off base and wrong. That's not it at all. They're right for us, and but they're but they're subjective, and what that means is like if we're holding other people to those standards, we really need to be kind of mindful of what we're doing, mindful that hey, this isn't really the only way to think about this. It's not the only way to do it. And this other person may have their own standards, and I ought to be curious about that and hear more about that. And maybe my standards aren't appropriate for this particular situation or this particular relationship. So having an understanding of that is, I think, critical to not having expectations really just hijack and interfere your partnership. Um, Misunderstanding number two is kind of not seeing the the way that our expectations can be tied up in really strong emotional content, really strong feelings. So a lot of our expectations are formed from, let's say, really early childhood experiences, for example, like they're personal to us. And so when people don't meet them, it can be really like, it can seem like or really look like they're violating, um, you know, strong values that we have. And we can take that very personally, and get really angry and frustrated and feel betrayed and feel like there's disloyalty, feel like there's bad intentions on the other side. It can look that way and feel that way, more importantly. And those feelings can be very intense. They can create a sense of urgency and crisis around the breach of expectations. And that urgency and crisis can really, the energy of it can lead partners to, kind of head first into conflict. That is, instead of seeing the intensity of the motions as a kind of red flag and a time to pause and settle down, partners can read those emotions as a sign of the importance of the standard and an importance of obtaining compliance to the standard, and that will have the kind of counterproductive effect of partners backing themselves into corners and and bringing things to a head that don't need to be brought to a head, um, and trying to extract compliance to standards when people don't like want to live that way, especially in partnerships. We don't want to comply with other people's standards. We want to, especially in a partnership. That might be okay in like, you know, uh, in an employment setting. I might be fine with just complying with the directives because, it's the way things work, and I need to bring home a paycheck and whatever. But that's compliance is different from partnership. Partnership is about bringing the whole person into the company, um, and and it's about you know equals. Not uh, one person being boss over the other. Really, I mean, even if one is a CEO and the other is not, it's still you know in high level professional co-founder relationships, compliance is not what we're after. We're after partnership. So that's number two, is like being aware of the emotional dimension of this and the role that it plays in hijacking good feelings and dialogue and rapport and driving partnerships into crisis instead of kind of serving as a caution sign and a slow down and get settled sign. So another misunderstanding that in this area that can really be problematic is we take we look at another person's behavior and we take it personally, and we view it like we look at it at face value. Another way of saying this is like we we think that people are doing things the way that they're doing things, like because of us or because like intentionally towards us. We take it personally, especially like if we have these expectations running, and people aren't meeting them, we tend to, it's easy to take it personally. It's easy to get frustrated by that. It's easy to get upset by it. And what we don't see is that is like what is behind people's behaviors. People are behaving and doing the things that they're doing, and this is true of all of us, because it makes sense for us to do it that way. Like we're all kind of basically doing the best that we can based on what we know and the experiences that we had in our current level of understanding. And that's why we do the things that we do the way that we do them. And there's no other real reason for it. Like that we just generally, that's the way that we work. And so when a partner is not doing things the way that we think they ought to be, um, we kind of, it's easy to see that they're not doing things the way that they ought, that we think they ought to be, but it's not so easy to see that behind that behavior is this whole world of thinking and experience and intelligence that explains why your partner is doing things the way that they are. And so so the misunderstanding here is to focus on the behavior and get really caught up in the behavior and not get curious and open and reflective about, why are we doing things this way? Why are you doing things this way? How does it look to you? What is your reasoning behind it? What is your, you know, and what is the kind of, what's the explanation for your approaching things this way? What assumptions are behind it? And well, here's how it looks to me, and why am I wrong about this? Why what am I not seeing about the way that you're doing things? And if you take the dialogue to that level, then behavior no longer, it doesn't know it no longer looks personal. Um, we more, it's more easy to see that people are doing things for their own reason, not um, out of spite or something like that, right? And this leads really to the fourth kind of misunderstanding, I think, which is that people try to fix behaviors um, without uh, without an appreciation for the fact that behavior is downstream. Behavior is a byproduct of people's thinking and level of understanding, and you have to engage at that deeper level to really influence behavior. Like I said, you could get some short-term compliance, but you will not get rapport and understanding and permanent evolution, really, without a deeper level conversation about the thinking and understanding and philosophy and priorities behind behavior. So, so that is that's the essence of what I think is most important to understand about expectations. So to summarize, kind of to appreciate the subjectivity and the made-up nature of our own expectations, and recognize that we've made up set of standards and rules about life. So have other people and partners, and it's normal and natural for us to have our own subjective orientation and approach to things. Number two is like notice the emotions around it, and when we're upset by other people's behaviors, to see like, oh, that's just my own, that's the emotional content of my own expectations, and give yourself time to recognize that as your own, come back into a balanced state. And in our foundations program, we talk about just that innate resilience that, when we see ourselves going out of a balance, there's nothing we need to do about it. We'll come back into balance on our own. And when we do, we'll see things with a clearer set of eyes and a better perspective. And then three is to just be really open, humble, and curious, and in a learning and dialogue mindset about the behaviors that we're observing in partnership, and really engaging that at the level of seeking understanding, and bringing awareness to our own expectations and our own behaviors, and getting curious about our partners and what's behind them. And that kind of a dialogue will, if we're open, and if we're open and maintaining a learning orientation, that will lead to deeper understanding. It will lead to breakthroughs and new insights and better ways of doing things. And it will drive things forward, including things that you just likely would never, couldn't anticipate, really, without, in the absence of that dialogue. So it could be a really fruitful exchange that brings forward a lot of new ideas about how to do work, and how to structure partnership, and so forth. And the final kind of suggestion here is to just be really open to being influenced.
Mhm.
Um, be open to being influenced by your partner. Um, uh, that, I think, is really where the the opportunity lies. My wife and I did a kind of communications seminar recently, and there was a quote at the beginning of it: "Conflict is growth trying to happen." And that's like a very good sort of capsule summary here of, where, when there's a misalignment or seeming misalignment, there's growth trying to happen. But in order for it to happen, we need to be open to changing. So in a lot of ways, that means, you know, uh, maybe your own behavior does need to change in response to your own expectations. Maybe you're not meeting your own expectations, or maybe your partner's expectations are reasonable. Maybe there's something that you hear in what your partner is saying about it that makes sense to you, and it makes sense to modify your behavior, to step up a little bit more. And that that's the opportunity of partnership. It will make you a better person. um so with that, let me wind things up, and if there are any questions, uh, uh, pressing issues, concerns out there, I'm opening the floor.
I'll kick that off. Um, I'm I've been thinking about expectation in kind of terms of attachment, both attachment to some future outcome of how this other person is going to act or not act, but also attachment to expectations, kind of as the manifestation of the beliefs that have gotten me to this point. And there is kind of a sense of, no, this has worked because I'm here.
Yeah.
Um, do you have any insight into, whether it's your own experience or people you've seen where they've had this kind of rigidity, like, no, this works, and being able to soften into that, and how that kind of transition can happen from rigid to soft?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I personally have had that experience myself, of going from rigid to soft, as you described. And I mean, I think, Chris, that's the essence, really, of what I'm trying to convey in this seminar, in this webinar. Like, is the rigidity comes from everything that you just said. It really looks like this is really important um, to do things this way, because if you don't, things are going to fall apart. And uh, it means you're a bad person, and it means you're irresponsible or not professional or inconsiderate, and you clearly don't, you know what I mean? Like, that's the difficult part of expectations, is because they're rooted in in the whole of our life experience. Um, they can look really real and objectively true and very, very important, you know. But it's it's really understanding the subjectivity of our personal set of views, and how they're really just created by our own set of subjective thoughts and beliefs and conclusions that we've come to, and seeing that at a really deep level, like uh, at how funny that is. Like, oh, I see what I just did. I just took my own set of ideas, and like I just assumed that the whole world should conform to them, you know. So for me, like in my marriage, this played out as around the area of like orderliness and cleanliness in the house. You know, like I grew up a certain way around that. Carolyn had a whole set of different experiences around that, and and sure enough, there was a we went head to head on this issue for a really long time, until I really woke up to, like, this is just an idea I have. I just have this idea that she should prioritize this the way I do. But she was just prioritizing, like, being with the kids, and making play dates with the children, and doing like all the things that were urgent and important for her, which I happen to agree with. When I once I examined that and really understood what was happening, I was like, I'm applying this kind of standard that I don't even agree with. I would much prefer that Carolyn had that set of priorities, and for me to get a little bit more comfortable with a messier house. So, um, yeah, so that's kind of what I'm trying to point to, is the the sort of like emotional content behind this can make this a real, like, a minefield for people, and people don't see it as such. They don't see what's going on.
Another question on that, kind of going back to kind of the example we started with around, nose to the grindstone versus this
Yeah.
balance of other priorities. And I'm curious about how partners can explore those kinds of things in terms of like setting a culture versus actually butting up against those kind of in the course of their business and their partnership, and what kinds of conversations are helpful to have kind of at that beginning of the funnel, so to say.
Yeah. So, in other words, like, developing, let's say, a set of company values, and then looking to company values as an arbiter, let's say, or
Yeah, an arbiter and also kind of like a means of alignment. It's like
yeah,
if if partner A is not answering emails at nights and on weekends because he's with his kids, and partner B is doing those things, I think uh, that could cause more friction if it's not kind of out in the open that these are the values that we're bringing to the table, or
hmm
the styles. So it's kind of like, what should partners be talking about in terms of these things when things are in good rapport, compared to downstream when it's
yeah.
friction.
It's a really that's a very interesting and good question, Chris. And I don't have a lot to say about the creation of, like, let's say, a set of values, uh, in in this context. What I would say is that in the startup and the emerging growth phase, when co-founder teams are coming together and they're really looking to get through those initial hurdles in the startup process. You know, it doesn't it doesn't make a lot of sense to have an external set of company values that people. It just doesn't. There's not enough of a culture there yet. There's not a group identity yet. So it's really just a collection of human beings trying to trying to have productive working relationships. Kind of an identifiable kind of group set of values and cultures really comes into play uh, as the company grows and, has, let's say, 30, 40, 50 initial employees. And then there needs to be a way to screen, um, people that aren't going to fit into the way things are done, so that the right people are opting in and opting out, and getting hired into the culture. And um, in connection with that process, like what we're trying to do with this content I've shared is really enable people to be working together at a deeper level where there's less personal reactivity, less people are less locked in their own thinking, but locked in their own ideas, and that they see where their thinking is highly personalized and can kind of take that into account and enter into a dialogue where there is a lot of shared room for mutual understanding, and that is a very healthy place to begin to formulate and create a culture and operate a company.
Yeah.
And kind of like, I think from that place you have like, it's a nice start. It's a nice kind of ground um, to start out at.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
None from me. We just had Mike join. I'm curious if he may have anything to ask.
Yeah, Mike, welcome. We're kind of at the tail end here, but if there's something that you are curious about or want to ask about, or uh, would love to hear from you.
Baxter here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hey, so I enjoyed the presentation, and I'm actually a co-founder in a very early startup right now. And as you were describing, sort of the two different personalities, the one founder who wants to takes time off on the weekends to spend time with family, and then the other who's kind of nose to the grind. I am the latter there. So I just had a conversation with one of my founders this morning about
Mm-hmm.
responsiveness, because we are not a brick and mortar. We're just all online right now. We're kind of operating across the country, so we collaborate through Discord primarily, and so it's been an interesting dynamic, and the responsiveness has been a bit of an issue. So this
Mm-hmm.
is, but what you've said about expectations really being a fiction in our own mind, and they have to be clearly communicated before we even begin to start trying to hold someone to them. That resonated to me, because yeah, this could just all be on my end, and my own expectations not being met, which may not be reasonable, and they certainly aren't reasonable until I'm clear about them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you kind of saw some value in that. I mean, I think, you took away exactly what I had in mind. I mean, it's kind of like, um, it's really about going into it in a spirit of exploration. Like, hey, this is how it looks to me, and this is what and this is why I see things the way that I see things. How do you see them? And seeing what comes from that dialogue, and uh, what I've learned is that there's there's just got to be some room for people having different styles and priority. Like I don't, there's just got to be room for two human beings um, to have different orientations.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thanks for joining us, Baxter. How'd you learn about the webinar?
Oh, I saw Chris did a post on Facebook, and so I thought I'd check it out.
Awesome, good. Yeah, well, feel free to follow up with us. Let us know how it goes, and if we can, kind of help further.
Okay, great. Will do.
Okay, good. Well, listen, I really enjoyed this. Thanks to both of you for your questions. And next one will be in 2 weeks. We'll be focusing on it's a good one. It's what happens when you really don't like your partner. And that's a juicy subject. So I look forward to seeing you there.
Perfect.
Right.
Thanks, Francesco.
All right, talk soon.